part of our everyday world anymore. And we have to work out a way to ethically and respectfully mourn them. So they remain eternally present, but as a trace, or an image, or a memory. So we no longer have a singular relationship with them. So my friend has gone, and all I have left are the pictures, which in the end are ghostly, or as Derrida would say, spectral. They're ghostly traces of my friend. So the friend is eternally absent and present. So I didn't arrive at this thinking without a context, and I'll speak a bit about the history of my art-making projects to gain insight into why I may have arrived at this interest in binaries and trace. I spent my childhood on a small island in the Central Pacific Ocean, and it was nice to hear the mention of the South Pacific peoples here in Mackay the other day, because it was an island ruled by British colonial structures. I was surrounded by Kiribati or Gilbertese, Tuvaluan or Ellis, British, Hong Konger and Australian people, and I heard a whole lot of different languages, different accents. I came back to Melbourne when I was 11, and after high school I completed a Bachelor of Arts and I studied Literature and History. That was in 1972. And then a Bachelor of Fine Art well after that in the 80s. So that was an era characterised by theories of deconstruction, semiotics, and we read a lot of Baudrillard and Roland Barthes. The postmodern theory that informed my my Bachelor of Fine Art led me also to think about citation and copy, and artists like David Sali, he, for example, pictured as, often a shattered, non-essential, copied sort of subject. I also lived in Italy for nearly 2 years between my undergraduate degrees and learnt to speak and read Italian a bit. So that this background that I've just described generated my interest in language, translation and semiotics. And that's, I think, maybe why I was drawn to printmaking as a skill which is so much about the translation of image from idea to matrix to paper. But here in Mackay today we're talking about books, so I've worked a lot with making books as an art form that's been supported by the Artist Book Awards, and I wish there were more of them, but thank you to Artspace Mackay and also the amazing Geelong Gallery, who really have championed printmaking. I firstly started approaching bookmaking as an image maker. And I trained at the Victorian College of the Arts with wonderful Alan Mittelman. And in looking through my talk, there's a lot of ghosts in my talk, so Alan has become a ghost now, just recently. I trained with Alan and Graham Francella, and there was some mention of the artist's book as a form there. We visited the Matic, for example, and made paper with Wilma Tobacco. But my stronger relationship to the book was formed as an undergraduate student, where I studied literature, poetry and history. I'm drawn to books also by the book's relationship to fine art printmaking, so where I trained at art school, and printmaking's long history of printed matter. For me, the book also signifies powerful historical forces, where literature is a power that can question assumed knowledges. It can create reproduction of knowledge and a sharing of knowledge and information. And I'm interested also in the image as a translation of what we can see, as well as the understanding of the image as another type of language, a visual language. So the artist book sits in an awkward position between all those better known art forms, a print, a painting, as we were talking about the other day. It sits between all those forms, and those factors also given my place in the world as a woman in the patriarchy, and a person of knowledge with more than one language, and a sense of myself as a person it gives me that sense of a person not quite at home. When I left Barnaba, I had a British accent. I was quite British, but I learnt very quickly to lose that accent when I hit primary school in Melbourne. So for me, I guess what's most appealing about an artist's book is that it's at home, but uneasily at home in many contexts. So I like that awkwardness. My Master of Fine Art project was called Joining the Choir Invisible, and I made works about coral reefs. Living on Barnaba, it was a coral atoll. So it was about coral reefs and environmental degradation. But in the background, I was thinking about the deaths of my parents, my mum in 1997 and my dad in 2001, and about the coral atoll that I grew up on. In Derrida's thinking, which I didn't really look at that closely, I was, a lazy reader, obviously, as we all are when we start with philosophy, so I skimmed through it all. But reading his work on trace, iteration and mourning was really helpful. And so his observation that there's no text without context and there's no origin that is unique helped me in making the work. The respect that we must have for others to maintain an ethical life was a resonant and rich parallel for the respect I felt for the processes and methods of printmaking processes too. So I made lots of images of coral, and no matter how many times I cut them out and made them over and over again, I never actually could remake the coral. That was part of the thinking in the project. I've also, there's another, this next slide is to document support that I've had as a lecturer in fine art at Monash University from my wonderful, the colleagues there have really supported me in my work and my thinking. I've also been supported by the impact conferences hosted at the University of West of England, where I met and worked with Sarah Bodman and her colleagues, and where I met Tim. And I've attended a few courses in the last few years run by the Melbourne School of Continental Philosophy, which have been really rewarding. And I've worked together with my amazing colleagues, Richard Harding, another ghost, and Alison Alder. So it's been amazing to get that support from people to present shows together. So I'll talk a bit about my book now. And to support, I hope that what I've spoken about will present my discussion of the book. Quite recently I've been exploring making a different type of matrix to make images using fabrics as the basis of the print to make relief prints. And this was particularly in response to Melbourne's lockdown when we were all inside for a very long time. And I had to use what I had at hand. I noticed when I printed from a block, a relief print or a matrix made by gluing furnishing fabrics onto a piece of cardboard, once I'd printed it, it didn't look like the fabric anymore. And it was only when I printed it that I was able to notice the pattern of the weaving that held the fabric together. Some of the fabrics sort of disappeared. They just became patterns on the pages. But there was always a little hint of the fabric in the printed image, that trace of its other life. In these works too, there was a drift towards minimalist aesthetics, acknowledging my admiration for Agnes Martin's works, and how little does it take to set off this chain of signification. The field of minimalist abstraction refutes signification to some extent, and it certainly refutes narrative and illustration. The philosopher Simon O'Sullivan points out the important difference between representation and encounter. A representation, or a re-presentation, affirms what we already know, while in an encounter, he says, and I quote, "Typical ways of being in the world are challenged, and our systems of knowledge are disrupted. We are forced to thought." For O'Sullivan, this rupture is an affirmative moment, an affirmation, he says, of a new world. So I think this is really right at the heart of when we make prints, and with image making, they're important thoughts. The text of many of my books are printed using letterpress technology, and my type has a history of repurposing. I inherited much of it from an artist from far north Queensland, another ghostly presence in wonderful Cherie Kinleyside. So thank you, Cherie. And the type had been given to her by a printer retiring from a commercial printery. And as when you set and print, distribute the type, I wonder how many other words and sentences and paragraphs it has already spelled out. So it too carries a trace of all the other texts that it's printed and the potential texts of the future. In making the artist book well in 2024, I used images from found fabrics and typeset text and the methods that I've just spoken a bit about. And I was investigating the same themes as earlier projects, thinking about loss and mourning, inspired and supported by the distance and difference I observe between the matrix and the impression. And I was using that to think about the death of my partner, Mitchell Fairclough, in 2022. So the texts in the book suggest the diagnosis, treatment and progression of an illness, and Mitchell had pancreatic cancer. And these texts are juxtaposed with descriptions of less scientific methods of predicting the future: soothsaying, astrology, guesswork and conspiracy, forecasting, which leads to weather. I wanted to print the words in contexts that would demonstrate a shifting and multiplying of meanings. So, well, scans, tests, bloods, x-rays, soothsayer, divination, gathering signs, omens, symptoms, fortune teller, reading the future as a type of prognosis. There they are. And to get better, that's what we all want to hear. When the doctor speaks to us, will I get better? Will I improve? Or will I stay the same? There's some images there. And come and have a look at the book. I have it on my table out there. The words are interspersed with a single repeated bleed image on text-free pages. And that image is printed from the fabric in a warmish yellow that sits lightly on the pages. It's not a very assertive colour. The weave of the fabric, as it was transformed by printing, is loose and irregular, and I've thought of it as a type of unravelling or a just hanging together. And it also suggests a kind of static, a static of uncertainty surrounding a diagnosis of cancer, and of, in some quarters, but not in mine, a loss of faith in truth, as soothsayers contaminate science. So, to conclude, I've got a few more thoughts about artist books, and we can never see the whole book at once. We have to let each page go as we travel through it. Each page becomes a trace, and the book is a set of fragments echoing a whole. To do justice to the book that we've looked through, we try really hard to remember it as a whole, but of course that's too hard to realise. It's too hard to remember. It is, the book is recalled, I think, as a stack of single pages, some of which we remember better than others, if we remember them at all. We know it's a book, but it's made of all those separate pages, images and texts. So that's why this talk is titled Well, or Oh Well. The many meanings of that word echo through the book, and the images suggest a fragile hanging together. The words create a cross-referencing of meaning, I hope. It reminds me of some of the unanswerable questions I struggled with as I experienced serious illness. My memories came in bits and pieces. The whole can't be recalled. To be well is to be healthy and to live, and to do something well is really positive. But in another tone of voice, it expresses uncertainty. Well, there's something I want to tell you, Tim. And of course, a well is a deep, dark shaft sunk into the ground to find water. It can indicate abundance and a deep well of sympathy. The word well, it doesn't mean just one thing, and its meaning, as with most things, is dependent on context. So Jacques Derrida, again, his thinking points to an embrace of that diffusion of significations, rather than operating within the system of exclusionary or violently exclusionary binaries: body, mind, our nation, foreigners, etc., male, female, justice, law, healthy, ill. The most ethical position, I think, is to acknowledge and examine the uneasy, unsolvable and painful nature of those distinctions, and rather than searching for that single fixed point, however reassuring that would be, and to respect and get to know the subtleties of difference. So the problems we face in making our prints and books are not, as in life, are not easy or tidy, and so we acknowledge and interrogate those problems in a happy engagement with that endless conundrum of a creative life. So I hope my book speaks to that a bit. Thank you.
But how could you stop that? I mean, that was incredible. As a light sort of segue, I too got my British accent bashed out of me in Townsville. So the Queenslanders don't like the poms. Not that I'm English, I was an army brat. That was